G'day, mate. Luke Ford here. I want to talk about, I think, perhaps the most painful book that I've ever read. It's a book called Passionate Marriage, Sex, Love, and Intimacy in Emotionally Committed Relationships. Here we go. By David Schnarch. And this book was first introduced to me by a social worker around 2008. And so I thought, this is a lefty. This is someone who's going to give me something that's just filled with all sorts of jargon. And I wasn't really expecting that much from the book. But I was pleasantly surprised, and I recommended it to a therapist friend of mine who'd been through several marriages, and she found it the most painful, the most challenging book that she had ever read. And there's so much in here, and it also is useful. It also applies even if you're not married, even if you're not in a relationship, even if you're just a single person. There's just so much here to chew on, and I've made a whole bunch of notes, as you can see, to share that with you. Passionate Marriage, very simple title, right? And this is how it starts out. When I was a young graduate student at Michigan State University, which is where my father did his first PhD, his PhD in rhetoric, I chose a charismatic professor to be chair of my research thesis for my master's degree. Now, we often choose people who are charismatic. We often choose people who have power, and we don't always choose people in our own best interest, because our own desires for prestige or power or to look cool kind of overwhelm our own best interests. Unfortunately for me, the results at best failed to confirm and possibly negated my mentor's clinical approach. All right. So the person who is supervising his PhD, well, the results from David Schnarch's research just aren't substantiating. And this is before the great, confirmation doesn't replicate, the great replication crisis. Fortunately, the statistics expert on my thesis committee was Jack Hunter, a gifted mathematician who taught me a lot more than the meaning of numbers. And right at the introduction here is a sentence from a book called Love in the Western World. I do not hold that practical truths can be made plain in the marketplace. All right. So just like on YouTube, there are all sorts of plain truths that you cannot say on YouTube, cannot say in much of polite society, you cannot say on other forms of social media. In every society that has ever existed, there have been all sorts of plain truths that you cannot state publicly. So this society is no exception to that rule. So David Schnarch recalls that my PhD thesis professor pressured me to write my thesis as if the results were equivocal rather than as negative. And Jack showed me how the data suggested otherwise. After I spent a year writing my thesis from both viewpoints, my mentor decreed that this second analysis should be reduced to a footnote, literally. Shocked and frightened, I appealed to the other faculty members on my thesis committee. They told me to work it out with my mentor. One said privately, look, Dave, we have to live with him a lot longer than we have to live with you. Give him what he wants. So we constantly face these sorts of pressures in our life. Do we just give powerful people what they want to spare ourselves from a great deal of discomfort? Okay, now Jack Hunter said to me, Dave, once you sign your name to that thesis, it is on there forever. You can always do another master's thesis, do what you think you should do. But I'd be throwing away years of work, then do what you think you should do. There were times I was angry at Jack and myself because he encouraged me to do what I thought was right. Often when you do what you think is right, the results are quite painful. Not exactly what you might hope for. But now I count this whole experience among the truly great things in my life. My next 2 years were devoted to an entirely new thesis with a new chair. And in my acknowledgement section of my master's thesis lies an unknowing statement of differentiation. I've learned something about quality research and also that the emotional prices involved in making expedient and pragmatic concessions often far exceed the effort needed to stand on my own convictions. There are considerable emotional costs in receiving one master's degree for the price of 2 master's theses, and I've been fortunate to have friends who are willing to bear with me while I was paying the costs. Right, so this is what differentiation's all about. It's the ability to soothe oneself while under stress. So constantly in life, we attempted to sell ourselves out, sell out what we stand for. If we have a good friend, then we're very tempted to just go along with what the good friend really, really wants because we want to preserve that friendship. But do we have the integrity to stand on our own 2 feet, to stand for what we think is right? For example, I made a pretty dramatic format change to this show over the past 3 months. And I got a lot of heat for it, and I got a lot of heat from friends. And so was I willing to sell out my own convictions to pursue a show that I really wanted to do, to stay in the good graces of people who are important to me? Or was I willing to stand in my own integrity and soothe my own anxiety by standing up for what I wanted to create? So we all face these kind of questions. The meaning of life is not a question we ask life, it's a question that life is asking us. So, your differentiation is important in 2 ways. You'll probably have to differentiate from much of what you've learned about how to achieve hot sex and deep intimacy. If you're interested in having either, it doesn't involve communication or giving into your partner, it involves holding onto yourself. You'll probably have to increase your differentiation if you want to explore your sexual potential with your spouse. And this is not an easy book to read. Romantic love is a relatively new development. Right, Western culture has no history of happy romantic love within marriage. Notions of romantic love didn't even exist until the 12th century, according to the book Love in the Western World. Our literature holds stories of spouses finding love outside of marriage, but even then it is tragic. So we tend, in the Western tradition, to view passionate love as an irresistible impulse that sears and annihilates us in its triumph. So we approach romance like a privileged form of suffering that makes us feel more alive, living dangerously, magnificently, and tragically. But what about passion within marriage, within a committed relationship? Okay. Not a whole lot about that in the Western tradition, in English literature. And the author says that this book also applies to singles. While differentiation always occurs in relationship, it doesn't need to be a committed one. Singles go through the differentiation process like anyone else. They do it with their parents, friends, lovers, and co-workers. Marriage people just have an advantage. Things heat up when you feel the knot is tied and the door is sealed. Right? So in realism, the whole theory of realism, John Mearsheimer style realism approach to international relations, he comes from the perspective that we're all locked into an iron cage and there's no escaping that reality. Different groups frequently have different interests that clash. Resources are finite. Human desires are infinite. Therefore, we are all locked in an iron cage and we have to work things out. That's a little bit like marriage, but it's also a little bit like our own lives. So yeah, incredibly painful and challenging book. Let me play a little bit from an interview with the author, David Schnarch.
I'm Dr. David Schnarch. I am director of the Marriage and Family Health Center in Evergreen, Colorado, author of Passionate Marriage, and more recently, Intimacy and Desire.
This is David Schnarch.
One of the most complex emotions I think human beings have. It means lots of different things to different people. It means lots of different things to different people. And for a whole lot of people, it's simply a feeling that they have. What they're used to thinking about is romantic love, where you can think straight, you are completely preoccupied with this other person. And unfortunately, a lot of people are expecting that's what's going to happen once they get married. And marriage requires an entirely different kind of experience. So perhaps the people who are dating this Valentine's Day, they have one view of it. But loving somebody is a very active process. Love is not just a feeling you have. It's supposed to accrue to the benefit of the loved one. So you have to be strong enough to love. And we've done a lot of research on our website, and it turns out that there are a whole lot of people that find it pretty hard to keep love going along.
So the author David Schnark here says that we labor under all sorts of misapprehensions about intimacy, that we think that really intimacy is only about when we disclose ourselves to others and then they accept us, right? Oh, that's intimacy. Well, no. Intimacy isn't just when our partner validates our feelings. We're able to disclose ourselves, say, on a live stream, and the chat doesn't validate your feelings. The chat doesn't validate your new format. Your live streaming partners don't validate the new format. Are you then able to stand on your own 2 feet? Right, see, we tend to assume that intimacy hinges on acceptance and validation from our partner, from our viewers, from our friends, from our religious community. Well, no. And we tend to confuse good communication with being understood the way we want, getting the responses we expect. Well, that's not necessarily how the world works. Usually when we tell people, you don't understand me, they usually do understand you. They just won't necessarily validate you and tell you that the way you see life is the way that they see life. So I've got someone in the chat, but I'm not sure who it is. So good evening, fellow Zoomer.
You hear me? It's Mike. How are you?
Hey, good, Mike. What's going on, man?
No, long time no talk. Hope you don't mind me coming on. You're in the middle of kind of your spiel.
No, absolutely. Go ahead. Anything that's on your mind.
Yeah, just hadn't been coming on. Nothing to do with the show. It's just I'd spent so much time on streams in the alt-right circles, and I kind of wanted to just go back to my normie life for a while. You know what I mean?
Great.
But yeah, no. So it's been good. Yeah, I mean, just been interesting to hear some of the buzz around your show and kind of some of the changes and stuff. But
yeah, a lot of people got very upset that I changed the format, and it's not nearly as much about the 1488 crowd.
Well, it's just been really interesting, and I don't know, kind of hard to figure out exactly the way people think about it, but it seems like there's a lot more attacking of people and their motives versus their actual arguments, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
You know, everyone's kind of what are some of the things I've heard, you know? Well, it's basically if you disagree and have a different take on, say, the JQ, you're gaslighting, trying to mislead, you know, rearguard action, something like that, as opposed to, oh, this person just has a different take than me. But I think it's kind of something that you see in marginalized movements or what have you.
Yeah, it was shocking to some people that I understood that YouTube had changed its terms of service. Now it's obvious to anyone who pays the least bit of attention that YouTube has dramatically changed both its explicit YouTube's terms of service and also how it enforces them. There have been about 20,000 channels taken down in the last few months. I mean, hundreds of thousands of videos have been taken down. At least 500,000 comments have been taken down, all for the same hate speech reason. So we're operating under a new regime. And even if YouTube didn't change, society has changed, because when you have all sorts of people going out there slaughtering others in the name of fighting demographic replacement, then you can't really talk about demographic replacement in the same terms when people are going out there and making the case for Western civilization by slaughtering innocent people, then traditional people who want to make the case for Western civilization have to differentiate themselves from these people carrying out mass slaughter. You want to like stay as far away from them as possible, and so doing necessitates a whole different language, a whole different approach. And on my show, it means kind of a new format, a much more elevated format to kind of get away from the crazies.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. And the history of your channel, I only came around I think the end of last year, which you had done a lot before that. But I think you kind of go through different stages and there's different challenges, and you've been challenged by the threat of strikes and censorship. So it's, maybe your channel right now isn't the strongest it has been, but I think it can weather it and make a recovery. I think there's a lot of really good content. It's just a 5-hour show is kind of hard to listen to, unless I'm stuck in the car for a while. But there is a show, I don't know, it was posted on Twitter, I think, amongst the circle of maybe some of your past disgruntled guests. It was like a 5-hour show where everyone was really going at Kyle, including KMG, and it was just a classic show. It was so entertaining. I've been thinking about it. I watched it over a day or two.
Yeah, I mean, Conflict does make for the most compelling shows, but Conflict's also fairly dangerous. People get their feelings hurt. People want to retaliate. In Conflict, people say things that they later regret. Conflict's also more likely to violate YouTube's terms of service. So Conflict is compelling, but it's also dangerous.
Yeah, and I get why, Kyle gets a lot of opposition and stuff like this, but I just think the outrage is so unreasonable. They act like he's their oppressive overlord when he's just some guy on YouTube who expresses different views, And KMG has stood up to him plenty of times, and he's on the show daily, you know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah,
my personality, I like to see the different viewpoints, because I'm kind of like a more free market freedom guy, and maybe align with Kyle in a lot of respects. But I like to have my viewpoints criticized by KMG, because I feel like that's how you grow, is by engaging or hearing people you disagree with, So I don't fully understand everything that's happened in the circle, but I'm not also in the middle of it, so I don't know. I kind of get along with everybody.
Yeah. So this is very intense work. So it's really easy to fall out with people that you do live streams with, and particularly people begin to feel a sense of ownership over a channel that they regularly participate in, and so it's very disrupting and disheartening and disturbing when the format changes, when the host goes in a different direction, and it's like this show that I've helped to build up is now going in a direction that I don't appreciate. And so whenever you enter into any kind of human relationship, it always contains the possibility of betrayal. You cannot have a relationship without the possibility of betrayal. And so people who've become attached to the show and formed a relationship with the show, they feel betrayed when the show changes. And that's just inherent in human relationships.
Yeah, and especially in these intense circles where people are trying to ascribe motivations to what you're doing that are really just totally off base. People just don't appreciate. I mean, you've been on YouTube for 10 plus years. You look at some of your old videos, they have hundreds of thousands of views, and maybe a lot of those views are based on who you had on or whatever, some attractive women. But at the same time, you built a platform, and I always try to be on my best behavior out of respect for you.
Thank you.
But not everybody seems to think that way. I don't know. I think it's so. I mean, you could totally understand watching the Luke Ford show, and maybe people tune in to see somebody else, or they think somebody has better takes than you. But people got kind of upset when I said, it wouldn't exist without Luke Ford. I mean, he built the platform. So if I got into this argument with some idiot online. It's without Luke, what like how would it have existed? Just the time that you dedicate, and people can criticize Kyle. They could, I would say KMG is more popular, but just the fact that they dedicate 3 to 5 hours on a stream is you got to appreciate that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's life. When you put yourself out there, you're not always going to be supported. You're not always going to be appreciated. You're not always going to get applause. So then the question becomes, are you able to stand on your own 2 feet and do what you want to do? For example, I changed the format, and almost nobody wanted this format change that I instituted about 3 months ago. I decided I want to do shows that I am more interested in, which means shows primarily revolving around ideas rather than e-drama. I want to do shows where we develop a deep understanding of particular ideas. I want to do shows where we go for weeks and weeks and weeks on just one book, because I want to go deep, and I want to do more of a graduate seminar approach rather than a Fox News or talk radio approach. And almost nobody wanted that, and I was willing to lose much of my audience. So my audience went to 1/3 of what it was. Instead of getting 180 live viewers, more likely to get, say, 60 or 70 on a weeknight. And I was willing to do that because I want to do a particular type of show, not just because of incentives, changes in society and changes in YouTube's terms of service, but also my own interests. And when you step out into the world and decide to change things to fit in line with what you really want, other people are inevitably going to get upset. People don't want you to change. People want you to keep doing the things that they expect from you. So if you change in some important way, people will get upset, and then they will try to push back. And so then it becomes a question, do I have the inner substance? Do I have the inner integrity to stand up for what I believe in, to stand up for what I want to do, to listen to the criticism, take the criticism, understand that people are upset, but still, in the final analysis, this is my show, my channel. Am I still willing to go forward doing the types of shows I want to do, even if I lose 2/3 of my audience? And on the other hand, once you start doing shows like this, it can be absolutely intoxicating to get an audience and to get praise. And it can make you feel amazing. But if you start growing towards the praise, like a plant grows towards the light, like a plant grows towards the sun, then that can be incredibly distorting, because the type of things that will get you the biggest audience, the most reaction, are usually the more extreme things, which will usually have a very negative effect on your real life. So to get applause in the virtual world, the easiest way to do it is to engage in rhetoric and behavior, which is extreme and tends to have very negative consequences on your real life. So the sorts of things that would be most conducive to a happy real life, if you then bring them over onto YouTube, will not be the most immediately compelling, because they'll lack the drama, they'll lack the e-drama, that the train wreck quality that brings in frequently a large audience.
Right, I gotcha. How do you feel about looking back about your changes, and I don't know, what do you think going forward, or what you might do? Or
I'm pretty sure I'm going to keep doing exactly what I've been doing the last 3 months. We're going to have a more intellectually demanding show. We're going to have a more focused show. We're going to get a deeper understanding of ideas, and we're going to do less e-drama. We're going to have fewer freaks on the show. There's going to be less of a freak show quality, of a train wreck quality to the show. And once people demonstrate themselves to be antisocial, they're not coming on the show. So a whole bunch of people who used to come on the show, once I realized that they had pretty strong antisocial tendencies, that they may indeed work out in other ways, but they're not going to work them out on my show. I'm 53 years of age. I'm just not going to put up with that in my life and on my show. I'm just not going to interact with people with antisocial personality tendencies. So a lot of people who've been on the show have not been back, because as soon as I see that I don't know, just levels of pathology, levels of sociopathy, then okay, I want to go as far away from that as possible. And the sad thing is, most people who have time to appear on a show like this are antisocial. Most people who have time and inclination to appear on a show like this are pathological. Most people who have the time and inclination and desire to appear on a show like this are not functioning well in the real world, which is why they have so much time for the virtual world. So for every 5 people who want to appear on this show, really only 1 is even worthy of a tryout. So I've just become increasingly selective about the type of people I allow on the show, and concurrently in my life, because if people are coming on the show, they're in my life to a degree.
Yeah, that makes, and I think even that involves you must feel like it's involved a sacrifice, because some of those people you used to have on, well, they might have caused problems. There were some great shows with them, like
oh yeah,
the show I mentioned. You know,
absolutely. Like there is a compelling nature to pathology. Like there's something compelling about people who are incredibly self-destructive. There's like a train wreck quality about people who are willing to, trash their spouses and trash their family and trash, their employer, and like trash all their important relationships and trash their religion and, trash the conventional morality. It is absolutely compelling to listen to that and to see that. But much of it is also pathological. And so one has to weigh up, like, what's more important to me, number of viewers or happiness and success at night? I mean, sleeping at night. For example, the show that I did with the most viewers, and is probably the most compelling show I've ever done, was the Jim Goad Saturday Night Massacre.
Yeah, that was a great one.
But on the other hand, that did not make my life happy. I lost my friendship with Jim Goad over it. There was just a lot of drama that had repercussions after the show, and I decided this is not really the type of show that I want to repeat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I don't know. I think the most of the discussion is centered around the JQ, and right, I feel like it's definitely a legitimate question. It could be answered legitimately, but in my opinion, it's just become the biggest sort of conspiracy theory, and what, on your channel at least, is mostly responsible for what has everyone at each other's throats.
Yeah,
it's just very few people can sort of answer that question legitimately or honestly. Maybe KMG sort of does.
Yes,
but that's kind of my takeaway from.
Yeah, people go crazy on it.
I mean, I get attacked all the time, and if you don't go full kind of K-Mac or Mein Kampf, they'll call you a subverter, they'll call you a gaslighter, which is what has happened to you.
Yeah.
You and Kyle are gaslighting and trying to trick people, and it's pretty entertaining, really. But that's about it.
Yeah, there's a terrific book that came out by John Mearsheimer, the Grand Delusion. I'll pull up the exact title here in a second. Mearsheimer, The Grand Delusion. Okay, so exact title, The Great Delusion, Liberal Dreams and International Realities. And he makes the point that most people only care about their own group, meaning their own nation. And so in all these endless JQ debates that we've done, one of the most frequent things said by the anti-J crowd is that, Jews only care about their own. Well, guess what? Most groups only care about their own. Chinese, by and large, do not lose sleep about Japanese suffering. Japanese, by and large, do not lose sleep about Sri Lankan suffering or suffering in Africa or in England. People in England, by and large, have not lost sleep over the suffering of the French, the Germans, and the Russians. So this is just part of the universal human condition. Overwhelmingly, people only care about the suffering of their group, their nation. And every group, every nation believes that they're special, that they are just uniquely superior in different ways to every other group on Earth. There's nothing unique to Jews in these categories. It's just part of the universal human condition, whether people are in darkest Africa or in South America or Central America or far Northeast Asia or South Asia or Northern Europe. This is universal. People care pretty much only about their group. People don't care about the suffering of outgroups, and everybody thinks that their nation, their group, by and large, is superior to every other nation. And yet, with much of the 1488 crowd, they're obsessed that Jews have these qualities, and Jews frequently do have these qualities, but just as often, other groups have these same human tendencies.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to mention one of the things that's been really entertaining is some of the things that have been mentioned on your show that have triggered a lot of people. That your video on Ash all day really triggered a lot of people. That was entertaining.
Yeah. I mean, what a fascinating story. Like, this lovely, intelligent Christian woman. You can see her taking the red pill in real time, and then saying all sorts of things that you just would never have expected to come out of her mouth when you first encountered her a few months previous. Back to you, Mike.
And and if you go in her comment section, you can really see all the people coming to her defense. Like, oh, you're just attacking her because she's telling the truth about the Jews, and that's just kind of a microcosm of this whole circle. The other thing was, I understand watching the show, you're just kind of being a devil's advocate, trying to spur a discussion, but regarding Epstein, you asked if to the women that were women or girls, 14-year-olds, it's certainly really disturbing what happened, but you asked if they had agency, like they came and of their own willing. I understood that you didn't necessarily think that, but you're kind of asking the question or being a devil's advocate as the host. A lot of people got super triggered by that on Twitter and other places. That was kind of funny. And then, Kyle defending Epstein or something like that. It's just people that say such harsh things on other subjects get so triggered by these comments. It's just pretty hilarious to me.
And actually, I very rarely say anything that I don't believe unless it's obvious. So I do believe that people over the age of 13 have agency. They don't have as much agency as when they're 25, but 18-year-olds don't have as much agency as 25-year-olds. It's only when you're 25 that the prefrontal cortex fully develops. That's the age when car rental companies will start renting a car to you. So people, by and large, they don't properly mature until about age 25. On the other hand, I don't view 14-year-olds as children. They are in a different category. They are teenagers, and I do believe that they have some degree of agency, more than a 9-year-old. And I believe that generally speaking, 17-year-olds have more agency than 13-year-olds, who in turn have a whole lot more than 11-year-olds. And so when it comes to, say, the question of capital punishment, I am for executing people who commit murder down to the age of 13. So in the Jewish tradition, at age 13, that's when you become responsible for your own choices. So your parents are then released from responsibility for your choices. And in the Jewish tradition, at age 13, you are then responsible. And in a traditional, or in a Jewish bar mitzvah ceremony, parents will go up front and they will say, they'll make a recitation. Essentially, I am no longer responsible for the sins of my children. Anything that they do from here on out, that is on them. And so you have to choose like some age range where people become responsible for their behavior. So if a 13-year-old goes out and commits murder, I am all for executing them. And if a 14-year-old goes out and chooses to commit an act of prostitution, I don't view them as 100% victim, completely blameless. I believe that they have some degree of agency, though considerably less degree of agency than an 18-year-old, who in turn has less agency than a 25-year-old. So there are continuums of agency. There are continuums of moral development, and that things operate on a continuum is incredibly triggering to people. They just want to believe that whatever the law says, that's black and white, that when someone is 17 years and 363 days, they don't have agency in the sexual arena in a state where 18 is the age of consent. But then once they turn that magic age of 18, because that's the law, then suddenly they have agency. And I recognize that that's the law, but the law is not the only body that decides what is moral and immoral. The law is not the only thing that decides how much agency people have. I think there's a continuum of agency. So parents typically will give 9-year-olds more responsibility than they'll give 4-year-olds. And they'll typically give 15-year-olds more responsibility than they'll give 11-year-olds. To me, this is just common sense. People who want to get outraged about this continuum of moral agency, I think they're just afraid of looking at reality. They just want to seize on someone saying something that they can then distort and get outraged about. We've got all these outrage mobs. Back to you, Mike.
Well, I just think it's really interesting that these people that kind of pride themselves in saying edgy things, suggesting Kyle should leave the country. If he's a multiple passport holder, he should polish his passport.
Yeah.
Oh, why are you getting offended, Kyle? And then you say something like that and they throw a little fit. I mean, I just think if you're going to be in these circles, you can't get triggered or offended, or it should be very, very seldomly. Yeah, and as soon as you said that, KMG was like, come on, Luke, you're being ridiculous. Like, how much compared to Jeffrey Epstein? What is a 14 or 15? And it was just part of a discussion, not that big of a deal. Like a million topics that have been brought up. But it was just one of those things that sticks out as kind of entertaining in the history of your show.
Yeah, people want black and white. Like, people want to go, okay, Jeffrey Epstein, evil, and all those who voluntarily sold their sexual services to him, who, as far as I'm aware, all evidence is that they were past pubescence. They were all 13 and older. They have absolutely no responsibility. They're all 100% victims. I just think, really, do you really want to look at the world where 13, 14, 15-year-olds bear zero responsibility for their choices? Zero? Really? Because that's not how parents operate. Parents give considerably more leeway to a normal 15-year-old than they do to an 11-year-old. And they give more leeway to an 11-year-old than they do to a 5-year-old.
I mean, I disagree with that comment completely. You know what I mean? I would hold the adults to a higher standard, but I didn't get all triggered and go online and talk about it. It's just on your show and in these circles, people are going to say things that's like nothing compared to some of the stuff I've heard against me and against other people, so it was just interesting to me. It stuck out. I got to take a break, but
okay, man, good to talk to you.
I'll be back. Yeah,
okay, cool. So I'm going to get back to this terrific book by David Schnack, Passionate Marriage, Sex, Love, and Intimacy in Emotionally Committed Relationships. So in the Western tradition, almost all movies, almost all TV shows, almost all novels are about passion outside of a long-term committed relationship. But what the heck about passion within a relationship? And does intimacy only mean where we disclose ourselves and then other people validate us? Oh, I validate your feelings, bro. What about kind of intimacy where we disclose ourselves to others and they don't validate us? They don't applaud us, but we learn to stand on our own 2 feet. And for example, we do the type of YouTube shows that we want to do. Even even though they're not popular, even though they rub some people the wrong way? Are we able to stand on our own 2 feet and do what we want, even if we don't get applauded for it? So, you mean intimacy doesn't involve acceptance and validation from my partner or feeling secure enough to disclose? Yeah. Intimacy does not depend on your partner validating you. Okay? Maturity is how much stress you can handle without lashing out at yourself or other people. I mean, that's what real intimacy and maturity is all about. Like, are you able to handle criticism and pushback and opposition and stress without trying to hurt yourself and without trying to needlessly hurt other people? Okay. So seeing sex as a drive makes us focus on relieving sexual tension rather than on wanting our partner. And it's kind of language and thinking that a lot of people are much more comfortable with. Is like, oh, I just want to scratch this itch. Think about it in those terms rather than in terms of connecting their partner. Now, it's true that the more horny people feel, the more they tend to seek relief. But if that's the only reason you think your partner wants to be with you, tends to kill sex and intimacy in long-term relationships. It's hard for couples to approach this any other way. Focusing on desire as motivation for sex overlook the many couples who struggle to increase desire and passion during sex. Seeing sexual desire as a biological drive sets us up to believe that we're automatically supposed to know how to have sex, although humans take longer to reach full sexual maturity than any species on Earth. Many techniques used to treat low sexual desire often create low sexual desire when couples do the same thing spontaneously. For instance, many therapists encourage embittered couples with low sexual desire to bypass and ignore their partner and fantasize about someone else during sex. But when you realize that your partner is touching you but pretending to be with someone else, does that fill you with desire? I don't think so. Sexual desire problems are difficult to cure when treatment has nothing to do with the eroticism, intimacy, and passion we anticipate and demand. Right. Marriage is often like Procrustes' famous code of hospitality. Procrustes built a bed for his guests the same way we build a marriage, according to our own expectations. Shorter visitors were stretched to fit, taller folks were surgically shortened. Likewise, your spouse will try to change you into what he or she thinks you should be, just as you have some fine-tuning in mind for your partner. Barbara Streisand once asked, why does a woman spend 10 years trying to change her husband and then complain, you're not the man I married? Marriage is the Procrustean bed in which we can develop and enhance our psychological and ethical integrity. It can be the cradle of adult development. Your spouse can always force you to choose between keeping your integrity and staying married, between holding on to yourself and holding on to your partner. Also, your live streaming partners. Okay, the people you do YouTube shows, they can always force you to choose between keeping your integrity and keeping them on your live streams and supporting your YouTube channel. People can always force you to make that choice. And if you always cave, then you are surrendering your own integrity because you don't have the courage to stand up for what you really believe in. These integrity issues often surface around sex, about what the two of you will do and will not do. but they can just as easily arise over issues about money, parenting, in-laws, and lifestyle. The more emotionally enmeshed you get, and you can get quite emotionally enmeshed with someone whose YouTube streams you watch on a regular basis, all right? The more interconnected you get emotionally, the more fused you get, the more you will push this choice right down to the wire. Stay in the relationship or cut bait and unsubscribe to the channel, right? If you get upset with the direction of the channel and you can't handle how annoyed you get, then you make a statement, that's it, bro, I'm unsubscribing, cutting you out. That's it, no more. I'm going to attack you now on Twitter. So the key is not to lose your nerve or get overreactive. Get locked into inflexible positions. Their relationships prepare us to live and to love on life's terms, not on our idealized terms. Facing relationship realities produces the personal integrity necessary for intimacy, eroticism, and a lifetime loving marriage. How is integrity relevant to marriage, relevant to relationships? The ability to face the reality, living according to your own values and beliefs in the face of opposition. Do you want to take your YouTube channel in a new direction? Do you want to do a new kind of YouTube show? Do you want to create new material? Even though most people who weigh in with an opinion are opposed, well, you're willing to stand up for your own integrity, or do you get frightened by conflict and back down? So we're all locked in an iron cage here. In this world, like China and the United States and Russia, England are locked in an iron cage. We're all locked in an iron cage with each other. There's no escape from reality. Get back to David Schnack talking about passionate marriage.
5 in an ongoing relationship. I don't think it's just the first love. I think what the difference is the very beginning of love. So that romantic infatuation is what a lot of people think of as love. That's what they're trying to rekindle. But that's done by the most primitive part of your brain. It's actually done by the reptilian brain, and it is definitely time limited. Mother Nature has this worked out that you couldn't possibly stay in that state, because you can't sleep, you can't eat, and nobody has time to take out the garbage. So there's a different kind of romantic love. It's the kind that we actually help couples get, which is a much more personal love. When people first get together, that's basically love between strangers. You not only don't know this other person, you...
Okay, that's David Schnack, the author of this terrific book, Passionate Marriage. So he talks about couples, and one of them, Bill and Joan. So we get married for the wrong reasons because we haven't matured enough for right reasons to exist yet. Struggling with wrong reasons for getting married can produce right reasons to stay married. Why did Bill and Joe get together? Both of them had low self-esteem. Both were afraid of being lonely. Joan feared meeting the world as a single person. Bill needed someone to take care of him. Joan needed someone to take care of. They both needed to be needed. They both believed two people can live more efficiently than one. I found stunning clarity in every couple's wrong reasons. They show us who we are, where we've been, and who we've been with, how we are with our partner now, and where we think we're headed. We like to believe that communication problems underlie most relationship difficulties because we welcome the idea that we can literally talk our way out of anything. Who doesn't want to be able to talk their way out of anything? We love the fantasy that we can understand and express our way out of our dilemmas. This is not what happens. We instead enter gridlock. The polishing process in relationship is differentiation. Differentiation is the process by which we become more uniquely ourselves by maintaining ourselves in relationships with those we love. It is the process of grinding off our rough edges through the normal abrasions of long-term, intimate relationships. Differentiation is the key to not holding grudges and recovering quickly from arguments, to tolerating intense intimacy and maintaining your priorities in the midst of daily life. Lets you expand your sexual relationship and rekindle desire and passion that has grown cold. Differentiation brings tenderness, generosity, and compassion. Differentiation is not a trait, however, it is a process, a lifelong learning process. So, what is differentiation? Once again, involves balancing two basic life forces, the drive for individuality and the drive for togetherness. Individuality propels us to follow our own directives, to be on our own, to create a unique identity. Togetherness pushes us to follow the directives of others, to be part of the group. When these two life forces for individuality and togetherness are expressed in balanced, healthy ways, the result is a meaningful relationship that doesn't deteriorate into emotional fusion. Giving up your individuality to be together is as defeating in the long run as giving up your relationship to maintain your individuality. Either way, you end up being less of a person with less of a relationship. Differentiation is your ability to maintain your sense of self when you are emotionally and or physically close to others, especially as they become increasingly important to you. Differentiation permits you to maintain your own course when lovers, friends, and family pressure you to agree and conform. Well-differentiated people can agree without feeling like they're losing themselves, and they can disagree without feeling alienated and embittered. They can stay connected with people who disagree with them and still know who they are. They don't have to leave the situation to hold on to their sense of self. They don't have to unsubscribe from a YouTube channel because they are feeling a little uncomfortable with its new direction.
You hardly know yourself. But when people are together for years, marriage teaches you more about yourself than you usually wanted to know. And in the process, you also get to know your partner very often better than they want to be known. And that's when real mature love comes into play. So it's quite different being in an emotionally committed relationship. A lot of people think that marriage or an ongoing relationship kills the very thing that they got married for, which is love, companionship, and sex. And so what we help people do is really rekindle love through the process of marriage itself. Marriage is a lot tougher than people anticipate. Marriage is a people-growing machine. And so if you go through that process, what we find is couples often have difficulty with sex and intimacy in the process of getting a relationship going, and unfortunately, a whole lot of people bail out. But we encourage people to have a very different view of what relationships are, and if you go through gridlock and the difficulties that couples have, the process itself often makes you mature enough to have the best sex of your life, particularly as you get older. That's when people really learn about love. Well, up to now.
Okay, so Mike is back. Mike, have you been listening to any good live streams, or have you been reading any good books lately?
I don't read too many books, which sounds, like a negative thing, but it's kind of like in today's world. I read it constantly online, interesting websites or links, but the book is kind of probably fizzled a little bit, I would think. But actually, I have a book. It is what's his name, the Canadian professor's book who wrote the 12 Reasons for Life, or you know what I'm talking
Jordan
about?
Peterson.
Yeah, I stole that from my brother, and I've been reading that every time I take a plane ride. I think I'm up to a page 100 or something. It's not the best book I've ever read by any stretch, but it's good enough for a plane where I'm not on the internet. Um, as far as live streams go, I like being on your show, but some of the other streams, you have a structured show because you got a lot of people watching. But I've enjoyed some of the free flowing shows, kind of like Bab's show. But I actually kind of a weird story, but started talking to that guy OV who I hated at first, but I just had some interesting conversations with him. It's a crazy story. A guy who's literally a fucking Nazi,
Yeah.
but I had interesting discussions with him and like got along with him as a person, which is just kind of a microcosm of this crazy little circle where things that you didn't think were possible become possible. As you know, you had that like falling out thing with the Wignats, which I saw that live on your show and was taken aback by it. I was like, this crazy shit I've ever seen. OV the Nazi coming on Luke Ford's show to talk about his falling out with the other Nazis. That's
Yeah.
another.
But he didn't really
That's
disclose anything. It was kind of weird. He didn't really share much. I wasn't sure if I was just being trolled or manipulated or what was going on. He wouldn't really disclose much.
Well, he disclosed enough, I think. But so I don't know if you're aware or not, but there was that whole circle of guys, like the gas station or Goitok or whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
so actually after and I really like going on your show, but it's um I don't know, I don't feel like I'm not gonna have a career. I'm not gonna do what you do, have a YouTube show and have a bunch of people tune in. Even if I had the talent to do that, it's like I just can't do the dedicated time. So, but I did like being able to call into a show and just talk about whatever. So I did that on his show and Bab's show, and yeah. So we had that crazy falling out, and he actually made me his co-host or whatever. So we've done a few shows together. So I try to limit my streaming time to 1 or 2 hours a week at this point because I just don't want it to become an unhealthy thing. You could easily become addicted to going online too much, or I've been addicted to video games before, so I just don't want it to become an unhealthy thing, even though I really enjoy it. So later that night, it, it was so hilarious. I wish I had a video of it, but every time a Wignat or whatever you want to call them gets out of line, they get called. I call it a tribunal or the Inquisition. They get called before all the head Wignats, and it's like, you went on that Jew Luke Ford, like Luke Ford, or some people call you Puke Ford. It's like you're the most hated guy, right? Because you're this Jewish guy subverting everything. So he gets called before the tribunal and just gets bitched out by all the Wignats. Which what I mean, I don't care. I'm not one of those people that's obsessed with people's motivations. Like, oh, are you trying to subvert? Are you an FBI agent? Are you getting paid by somebody? But it was the most hilarious thing to see him go before the Wignat tribunal and get bitched out, get thrown out of the Wignats or whatever. But
Yeah.
I just like him because he's an interesting guy to talk to. And like he talks to Dude, he talks to Babs. Like I don't know what his MO is or whatever, but I just think he's an interesting person to talk to amongst a lot of other people. So
Yeah.
I've just been on some of those smaller channels.
Yeah. So
talking.
what have you been thinking about as far as public issues last few weeks? What's dominating your thinking time?
I don't know. I can't pinpoint anything specifically.
Okay, so think about what you'd like to talk about, and I'll come back to you in a couple of minutes.
Yeah,
right?
actually,
So,
I have something to mention. Actually,
okay.
when I originally got into these circles, it was actually remember I went to the Trump rally in Houston, which was that was an interesting experience. I waited in line. I got at the very front, and I thought, I want to be more politically active. talk about political issues. And that was back in October, I would say. By the grace of God, or I don't know, maybe it was a road I didn't want to go down. No, I'm just joking. Like, I'm glad it happened. But your video got suggested on YouTube. I don't think that happens anymore. But that was the rabbit hole I went down in these political circles. And I've been talking about politics for maybe it's been 9 months now or a little bit more, but it's almost become too much. So I've been wanting to kind of scale back and go back to my normie life a little bit, but still be in these circles in a limited way. So that's kind of like the long and short of my story.
Yeah, you can definitely spend too much time online. You can definitely spend too much time talking about politics. You can definitely. Have you noticed any perils of the e-personality for yourself? Have you like fired off comments, emails, comments online that ended up creating, say, some self-destructive neural pathways that played out in your real life in a negative way? Or have your interactions on in the virtual world and the online world on the internet not created negative habits that have played out in a harmful way in your real life?
I would say I've kept them largely segmented or segregated. Maybe a limited amount of impact on my real life through conversations, but these are probably things I would have said in conversations beforehand. I've actually discovered there's a lot of, I mean, in these circles, being pro-Trump is not that big of a deal, but in real life, a lot of people would never say they really like Trump in real life. But a lot of housewives, house moms that are, have openly talked about how much they like Trump because they think he doesn't put up with people's bullshit and X, Y, Z. Um, my girlfriend, I tell her openly what I do. And one weekend we were hanging out, and it was like, babe, I just need 1 hour. I got to go online and talk to those Nazis and stuff. She's like, okay, babe, do your thing. I'll do my thing online. I'll talk to my mom. You talk to the Nazis, and it'll be fine. And so it really hasn't impacted too much. The only downside for me is the time rob. So the time you spend on here is time I can't be at the gym or bettering myself professionally. That's the only downside, for real.
And what addictions, if any, do you have operating in your life? Are you a sports fan? Are you into gambling? Like, what do you do for excitement?
I can just easily be detracted by, in this case, it's kind of YouTube, things online. I've been super addicted to video games in the past. Like, I mean, we've all played a video game that we really like. In my case, it was Command and Conquer. Before that, it was Civilization. That can just is like crack on my mind. Just get into it. Have you ever came across an article where it's like somebody in China died from playing video games for 2 days straight?
Yes.
I mean, it really can be addictive. I've never been addicted to drugs, God willing. I don't drink beer on a regular basis, but if I got a 12 pack in the fridge, I could drink it in a night easy. So I don't have the worst addictions, but I have a couple temptations.
What about porn?
Porn, I mean, yeah, I've looked at porn in the past. I came across it when I was younger. I mean, technology changes everything with the internet. You talked a little bit about that in your past. You were, I don't know exactly how you describe it. You were a sex addict or something like that.
Yeah.
So I've kind of always looked at porn in my life. Not sure how negative or maybe positive a consequence.
Have you ever lost a job because you're looking at porn at work?
No, definitely not. I would never look at it on a work system because I assume that's visible. No. But
and has anyone ever walked in on you using porn for reasons of autoeroticism?
No. But I think I remember having a girlfriend on my computer looking at some of the things I had and asking me questions. but it was more of a thing that made her feel guilty. Like, aren't I enough for you? And I honestly don't remember what I said to her. I think I said, yeah, but what about when you're not around? That's just one of those things that women can't understand. They can't understand why, even if you're 100% in love with the best woman, the most guys I think are going to want to see something different, or you know what I mean,
Yeah.
somebody else.
And so, what effect do you think porn has had on your life?
I think it's had slightly a negative effect. Um, in an alternate universe, I wouldn't have come across it. At the same time, though, I don't know. It makes you more experienced. Um, you get exposed to something, so you kind of know what's out there. There's also,
And
I mean, uh, I prefer, natural women. A lot of those porn stars now, especially, are silicone, and not only the real fake things they have, like fake boobs and everything, but it's what do you call it? Where they redo the image. Um,
yeah, Photoshop, photo
yeah,
retouching.
so it's gotten so fake that it's unappealing. And I really like the real women. Actually, I know a guy who moved out to California. He sells houses in San Diego, and he just can't be. No matter how hot the woman is, if she's got the hair down there, can't do it. And I always like that. It's just like a natural woman. But he makes fun of me, and I make fun of him. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Maybe it's had partially a positive effect. Hard to say.
So, did you say that you could drink 12 beers, in one evening?
Yeah, easily. And IPAs too, not like Bud Light bullshit.
And
But
so, how many units of alcohol would you say you consume in a typical week?
it's hard to say because um, I'm so. I mean, you could classify me as a binge drinker on certain occasions. I could go 2 weeks without alcohol easily. But if I have the temptation and I have a 12 pack in the fridge, I could drink it all in one night easy. Um, in a given week, it's hard to say an average when it fluctuates so much. Like 3, 4, 5 beers, maybe six on average in a week.
And what about food? Do you eat too much?
My eating habit is bad because I eat out, which is undesirable. I need to start cooking my own food at home, but I've fallen into the pause of city living where you don't make the time commitment to make your own food, so you eat out too much. But it's probably not too dissimilar from a lot of Americans.
Are you at your ideal weight, or are you overweight?
No, I'm overweight, definitely.
By how
Uh,
much?
not not too bad. It's hard to say. Maybe 30 something pounds. I'd always been heavy for my weight because I'm stocky. Even when I was younger, I wrestled, so I kind of have that build. So I'm definitely overweight. I need to lose weight, but I'm not at like endangering my health at this point. But it's definitely something I need to focus on. That's why when I'm live streaming, I'd be at the gym. That's kind of the sacrifice you make.
You think you might overeat to make anxiety go away because your stomach is so full? It's taking all the blood, bringing it to your stomach, and so you no longer feel anxiety or dissatisfaction. You're just kind of sated.
Do you think I eat to take
It was a question
anxiety
mark.
away?
Yeah, it was a question.
Um, I don't think so. But I think I'm definitely one of those people, like so many other people, that could make a sacrifice and eat a salad, but I don't do that. Um, I think it seems to me the biggest thing in our diet is the carbs. To me, that's what makes you gain the most weight. Um, so it's hard for me to make that sacrifice in salad as opposed to something else better. I could definitely do a lot better. My decision for diet.
Okay, so I'm going to read some more excerpts from this book, and if you hear something that you'd like to comment on, then jump in, or if you want to take the stream in a new direction, you can also just jump in, either literally into the stream, or you can write it in our private chat. So we're talking about this guy, David Schnarch, the author of Passionate Marriage. It's the most painful book you'll ever read. Sex, Love, and Intimacy in an Emotionally Committed Relationship. So he talks about when he was a graduate student studying clinical psychology, he came across the writings of Helmut Kaiser, who was a psychiatrist in the 1940s, largely unknown, and he described a figure skating performance by identical twins he'd seen as a young boy in pre-war Germany. What captured his attention was not the impeccably choreographed mirror skating, but the mesmerized crowd's wild enthusiasm. Precision military drill teams, synchronized swimming, and high-kicking chorus lines had the same effect. So the psychiatrist intuited that something about the unison involved in these performances stirred a great number of people. And thank you for the super chats, Deplorable and Josh. See, the rounds of Essentia on me are back up and running. Thank you, sir. Okay, so he recognized this fantasy for what it was, a fantasy of two or more bodies appearing to be controlled by a single mind. I think the traditional, the tradition is two people who become one, right? That's the fusion fantasy, right? And so a lot of us tend to have a fusion fantasy. We're just looking for that one person to complete us, and so that two people can then become one. And a lot of people who end up emotionally fused are then controlled by that connection. They have lost their ability to direct their own lives, and they get so swept up in how their partner feels that they lose their own integrity. There becomes only room for one opinion and one position. Differentiation, by contrast, is the ability to stay in connection with other people, particularly those who are important to you, without being consumed by your partner. So it's about learning to stand on your own 2 feet without selling yourself out. So how often do you sell yourself out to stay in connection with people? Do you give up your own integrity to avoid conflict? Right? That's the question. Very painful question. Our urge for togetherness and our capacity to care always drive us to seek connection, but true interdependence requires emotionally distinct people. Emotional fusion is the opposite of differentiation. Fusion is an invisible but tenacious emotional connection. Notice that the opposite of differentiation is neither connection nor lack of connection. It's a different kind of connection. Okay, so don't confuse differentiation with individuality, autonomy, or independence. So let's look at the chart here. Think of differentiation as a higher order process that involves balance between connection and autonomy. Lack of differentiation, that means lack of the ability to soothe one's own anxieties without other people propping you up and telling you that you're okay, that you're doing the right thing, that you disclose something and other people don't immediately support you, they don't applaud you, right? Can you stand on your own 2 feet when you disclose things to others and they don't hold you up? Emotional fusion deceives us into thinking that we're not connected, and so we move away in defense. But the deeper truth is that we have to move away to counterbalance the tremendous impact that we feel our spouse has on us. Or unable to turn away from our spouse, we turn ourselves over to the connection, but it feels engulfing. When a person is emotionally undifferentiated, His overpowering need for togetherness can feel like a burdensome neediness to be loved and accepted. A lot of my partners have felt me to be incredibly needy. Many people who feel this like overwhelming need to be accepted, of course, they had an insufficient emotional connection with their parents, and they claim that their difficulties with standing on their own 2 feet are caused by a lack of emotional connection. However, it's their emotional hunger caused by the presence of a compelling connection leads to emotional fusion. That connection becomes so compelling, so addicting, that they then sell themselves out. They then give themselves up to the connection, just like many people start live streaming, and the applause and the attention that they get for live streaming becomes so compelling, so addictive, just so much meets a deep inner need that they sell out their own integrity to get more and more of the applause by saying and doing more and more extreme things. When we have little differentiation, our identity is constructed out of what's called a reflected sense of self. So kind of gone through my life looking for other people to tell me who I am. We need continual contact, validation, and consensus from other people. We need other people to agree with us. This leaves us unable to maintain a clear sense of who we are in shifting or uncertain circumstances. We develop a contingent identity based on self in relationship. Because our identity depends on the relationship, we may demand that our partner doesn't change so that our identity won't change either. I often use the example of people sitting around the dinner table. In well-differentiated families, people's places or roles are fluid. Dad doesn't have to sit at the head of the table for everyone to know that he's dad. His self is not purely in relationship to everyone else. He can sit anywhere at the table, still know who he is. A frightened man has no loyalty to anyone except the person he's most frightened of in the moment. All cells in your body start from essentially the same material, but as they begin to differentiate, they take on unique properties and perform separate yet related functions. The greater the differentiation, the more sophisticated and adaptive the life form. More highly evolved forms of life display greater variability in response. Mammals show more variable reactions than amoeba or earthworms. Your fingerprints, voice print, and handwriting are examples of highly evolved uniqueness. Biologically and socially, humans represent the most sophisticated differentiation in the world. When you have a wide repertoire of possible responses, you, your family, your business, and your species has increased versatility and adaptability. Fewer resources in well-differentiated families and marriages have to be rigidly devoted to compensate for the inability of one member to take care of himself. There's less need for anyone to sacrifice growth or self-direction to maintain the stability of the family or marriage. Differentiation allows each person to function more independently and interdependently. Let's get more from David Schnarch here.
The guidelines for marriage or keeping a relationship going is communicate, communicate, communicate. And we end up telling people you can't stop communicating. It took the human race over 1 million years to learn to communicate, and it's not going to stop because you and your partner aren't getting along. But differentiation is really simply saying that the processes of growth, what makes human beings grow up and truly become adult, are built into emotionally committed relationships. That's what differentiation is. Differentiation is the process of becoming a whole human being, where you can stand on your own 2 feet even when you're with your partner, and standing on your own 2 feet even when you're horizontal, meaning you can hold on to yourself. And most people don't really understand that marriages are people growing machines. Mother Nature has this worked out pretty good over the last 1 million years. And all you have to do is fall in love and become a couple. And that will teach you the process of learning to hold on to yourself and validating yourself, learning to regulate your own anxiety, not getting overreactive, and tolerating pain for growth. So we have broken this very complex scientific process called differentiation down to these 4 basic points. And these are absolutely necessary if you're going to keep love alive, if you're going to keep sex interesting, and if you're going to have children.
Is the tell-all barometer sex for a good relationship?
I think it would be easy to say that sex is a good barometer because for most people, when you're battling out the wars of personal development, the wars of do I belong to you or do I belong to me, sex usually suffers. But there are people for whom they can be battling things out and sex doesn't deteriorate one iota, but that's not really something good. These are 2 people who are very often so out of contact with each other, and also sex isn't connected to anything personal, that they can be in the middle of World War III, and when it's time to take off their clothes, they can just go ahead, and I won't say that they have a good time, but they can certainly go through the act.
Okay, back to this terrific book, Passionate Marriage. Families are like multi-celled living entities. Just as your body is composed of many different cells, families gain or lose differentiation over generations according to the successful struggles of their members to develop. Human differentiation is the evolutionary outcome of countless generations of struggles to mate and develop. Your level of differentiation and that of your marriage and of your family results from how well you and your parents and your grandparents succeeded in becoming well-developed individuals while maintaining emotional contact with the family. Differentiation transcends generations because it is partly about intergenerational boundaries. How strong is the emotional umbilical cord between parents and children, particularly during adolescence and adulthood? Have you had to run away to other parts of the country to buffer your parents' impact on you? Have family members cut off from each other instead of separating emotionally but staying in touch? Do emotional bonds in your family choke its members' development? This idea that blood is thicker than water describes emotional fusion rather than loyalty. Meaningful sacrifice means free choice rather than emotional entanglements and guilt. When families and marriages have the use of us, there's no choice involved. Mike, anything you've heard you'd like to comment on?
Sorry, I stepped away, so I don't have anything to comment.
Okay,
but
great.
yeah.
Okay, great. So just let me know when you want to weigh in. All right, differentiation is more than what sets us apart from others. It determines how far apart we sit. Highly differentiated people have strong emotional bonds. They don't require physical distance, infrequent contact, or totally consuming careers to maintain their separate identities or to moderate their reactivity to others. So the more reactive you are, the less differentiated. The more that you okay, the less ability you have to soothe yourself and to hold on to yourself. Differentiated people can choose contact with others out of deep liking without being compulsively driven toward them or away from them. So we tend to confuse love with emotional fusion. We can understand differentiation and fusion from yet another perspective. Jealousy is a form of emotional fusion. Jealousy illustrates our intolerance for boundaries and our separateness from those we love. Our desire to possess our partner is inherently frustrated by the immutable fact that we are two fundamentally separate, though interrelated people. You can see emotional fusion in the mayhem we commit in relationships, in our inability to separate, to leave well enough alone when we're on the edge. Our most celebrated media events are often tragic tales involving emotional fusion. Mrs. Buttafuoco with a bullet in her brain who still loves her philandering husband and believes in his innocence. Lorena and John Bobbitt would rather cut it off than call off the competition. Olympic figure skater Tonya Harding's possession by ex-husband Tim and the O.J. Simpson murder trial. O.J. Simpson was clearly guilty of emotional fusion. You can't get more graphic than putting your hand on your wife's crotch and saying, "This belongs to me." That is, unless you kill her because she's leaving you. No longer unheard of that a man stalks and shoots his estranged wife while she's stopped at a red light or sitting at her desk at work. He can't let her start a new life, someone else, because emotionally she's part of him. Such a man loses himself when he loses his marriage. That's one of the prices of operating on a reflected sense of self. Okay, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I've heard from, I don't know, a few people in comments and such, and this is before I was even here, so I can't speak from direct experience. People like the show when you're talking about K-Mac, your views kind of aligned with theirs. But once Kaufness came into the show, they didn't like the direction it turned. In their words, you started gaslighting XYZ. I was just curious to hear your thoughts on kind of that experience. I'm just repeating what I've heard from other people, you know.
Yeah, okay, I got it. So, for years, I thought Kevin McDonald deserved a serious response, a serious academic response that, on the face of it, his ideas seemed interesting. I was quite willing to talk about them. I talked about them with various people, including Orthodox rabbis. I encouraged people in the Jewish community to respond to him, to reach out to him, to dialogue with him. I was not for shunning Kevin McDonald. I was not for calling him names. I was not for attacking him. I said, I think that his ideas deserve serious response and reaction. And the first person to provide a serious, thoughtful response to Kevin McDonald's thinking was Nathan Kaufness. And as soon as I read the Kaufness critique, I thought, okay, now this is a serious response. This is a thoughtful response. And as I then followed the back and forth between Kevin McDonald and Nathan Kaufness, it seemed clear to me that Kaufness overwhelmingly had got the best of it. So a whole bunch of people who are interested in my show believed in the magic key theory of how the world works, that this is a much cruder version, but it's like a lower IQ version of Kevin McDonald's work, is that Jewish perfidy, Jewish wrongdoing is the magic key for explaining how the world works. And people love their magic keys because it reduces the immense complexity of life, just boils it down to one single factor, which they could then, wrap their 115 IQ heads around. Well, Kaufness, I think, provides such a substantial challenge to this way of thinking that people were incredibly disturbed. Also, nobody on the alt-right was able to punch any holes in the Kaufness critique. So Greg Johnson says that he became a white nationalist from reading Kevin McDonald. Richard Spencer has said that Kevin McDonald is the most important intellectual on the alt-right. So if Kevin McDonald is as important as Greg Johnson and Richard Spencer say, then they need to provide a response to the Kaufness critique, or they need to admit that they were taken in by a charlatan. But the way they have responded with no response shows a complete lack of intellectual integrity. So until people on the distant right can punch some factual and logical holes in the Kaufness critique, then that calls into question the whole intellectual integrity of the alt-right and of its so-called leading thinkers, because this debate over Kaufness has not revealed them in a flattering light. They are unable to step up to the plate and to point out factual errors and logical errors in the Kaufness critique of Kevin McDonald's work. So this has been absolutely infuriating for many on the alt-right. So they just, when you don't have the facts on your side and when you don't have logic on your side, then you have to lower yourself to engage in just purely personal attacks, which has been the primary alt-right response to Nathan Kaufness, which then just makes them look increasingly ridiculous.
Well, I think it's really interesting, people have been taken in by Kevin McDonald, and I think what he says should be evaluated, but at the same time, it's one person's views one person's theory and should be. Unfortunately, I think this is kind of the downside of not engaging him. You get less opinions and less views on the subject. So K-Mac is one person, but it's become larger than one person because he's the only one talking on the subject, or one of the few people. So it becomes kind of this narrative that people fully support. And then Kaufness is one of the few people that's responded to him. So you kind of have two people's opinion out of 50. But I think people just don't realize or don't think about this is one person's narrative, one person's opinion. That in this movement, it's almost become like the word of God, wouldn't you say? And I think that's why it's kind of ridiculous, you know. And even Kaufness, who's very smart, at least educationally, I think he went to Columbia and he's at Oxford doing his PhD. So, I mean, while he's very smart, there should be an established professor responding to the K-Mac, not like a PhD student. But because it's such an untouchable subject, that's what we have. A kind of sort of marginalized professor and a pretty smart PhD student. So that's just what it is.
Right. So if, for example, I ran into a Jewish friend. I had coffee with a Jewish friend a few weeks ago, someone I've known for about 12 years. And he comes from a background in Hasbara, meaning pro-Israel advocacy. And he's just infuriated by the mere mention of John Mearsheimer, thinks that John Mearsheimer is just, the incarnation of evil. So I said to him, well, do you know of any factual errors in John Mearsheimer's work, the Israel lobby? And he said, well, yeah, because he deduced the wrong theories from the facts that he presented. So I said, okay, so none of the footnotes in his book you can point to as being incorrect. And he said, yeah, that's right. I can't challenge any of the facts, any of the footnotes on which he builds his theory. But John Mearsheimer, he doesn't understand how Washington really works. And so what my friend was doing was saying that I understand how Washington really works. I've got the secret knowledge. I've got the gnosis of how Washington really works, how American politics really works. And John Mearsheimer doesn't have this secret knowledge. And so that's an appeal to something that cannot be challenged or verified. Like there's no way of challenging whether or not my friend has the secret knowledge of how Washington really works. There's no way of empirically validating the claim that John Mearsheimer doesn't understand how Washington really works. So when you're reduced to making that kind of argument, it indicates that you don't have an argument. When you have to come up with something that ludicrous that you understand how Washington really works, but John Mearsheimer, the most prestigious and influential professor of political science of the last 40 years, he doesn't understand how Washington really works. That just indicates if that's the basis of your critique and attack, that's why you're so furious at Mearsheimer, then that indicates that you don't have the goods. You don't have the facts or the logic, so you have to appeal to a mystical argument to make your case. So too, for people who want to reduce most of the world's problems to the Jews, the appeal of a magic key for explaining how the world works is just so compelling, particularly for kind of fringe personalities. They need something to hold on to because otherwise they don't feel sufficient to stand on their own 2 feet in a complicated world where there's all sorts of information and theories that frequently contradict each other. So rather than living in that complicated world, and rather than living in a state of not knowing, living in a state of humility, they can't stand that lack of catharsis. They can't stand that lack of conviction. They can't stand that lack of clarity, that lack of being able to divide the world into good guys and bad guys. So because they're unable to soothe their own anxiety, they cling all the more strongly to this primitive belief that there's this one magic key that unlocks how history works. There's this one magic key that unlocks how the world works. And so when that key is threatened, then they become incredibly angry, incredibly defensive, just filled with rage and desire to take revenge, because the whole foundation for the way they live their life is threatened. And if that magic key is taken away, they don't really feel sufficient to just be a human being in a complicated world where there are all sorts of very interesting theories about how the world works. And they don't really have the education or knowledge sufficient to evaluate these very difficult, complicated, and challenging ideas, facts, theories. So they don't want to let go of this magic key that they've stumbled upon. And so I think that accounts for the high degree of vitriol that's directed at Coffness, because people had facts that they could take issue with Coffness's facts, they would do so, but they can't. If people were able to point out logical errors in the Coffness critique, they would do so. But when you have neither facts nor logic on your side, then you are reduced to just emotional fulmination.
Well, I mean, I came into the circle, and I was happy to find a space where I could speak critically about Judy. And when I say critically, if you're familiar with the term literary criticism,
yes,
it doesn't mean just everything is negative. It means picking something apart and talking about it. A circle where I could criticize Judaism, I thought was great, because you could never talk about that, because it's just not something you can talk about in most circles. And so I was happy to talk about my experience, being raised Jewish, traveling to Israel, dating an Israeli woman, which is a lot more experience in Judaism than the average person. But I wasn't prepared for what I came across in the circle, which was, pretty extreme to say the least. And there's so much you can criticize between, Jews can do no wrong and KMAC. But if you in the circle, kind of, if you fall too short of KMAC, you're going to be called a subverter and a gaslighter. And that's just kind of a summary of what's happened in the circle, and that's a topic that it can't really be talked about in a legitimate way in academic circles. But people like Coffness and his peers, I guess they can't really talk about it like other subjects. But it could be debated for decades before, I don't know, people come to a consensus or a better understanding. Unfortunately, it's not that, like I said, I think the well has just been poisoned on the JQ. Like, good luck having a healthful discussion about it, because it's just been poisoned over really millennia, but in modern times, over the past couple decades, just can't have a legitimate discussion about it, or it's at least extremely difficult. So I don't know.
Okay,
that's just the way it is.
I'll come back to you in a few minutes. I want to read a little bit more from this excellent book, Passionate Marriage by David Schnarch, Sex, Love, and Intimacy in Emotionally Committed Relationships. All right, so talks about all the weird things that people do as a result of, their relationship breaking up. Emotional fusion fuels the drama of less well-known people. Consider a case of a wife accused of cutting off her husband's testicles with a 5-inch scissors. She claimed he was often drunk, abusive, and screwing around. Both husband and wife petitioned the court to have a restraining order against her lifted so they could spend Thanksgiving and Christmas together with their 3 children. The husband expressed a desire to reconcile with his wife of 17 years. Then there's the case of a woman who pled with the judge from her wheelchair to drop attempted murder charges against her boyfriend. Witnesses saw him drag her down the street as she hung onto his van, slam her into a utility pole, and then back up and drive over her legs. She lost an arm, a leg, and her unborn baby as a result. The woman grabbed onto the side of the van because she wanted him to stay when he attempted to leave after an argument. Witnesses, including the woman's daughter, reported that the boyfriend held onto her with one hand as he drove her into the telephone pole. The woman, however, accused her daughter of falsifying her account because she don't want no man in my life. When the judge refused to lift an injunction forbidding contact between the two, the woman said it made her feel like they were both in jail, kept them from putting their relationship back together. Therapist training Indiana police in family violence said this wasn't surprising, though he characterized the assault as a severe felony just short of murder. These people are usually not ready to face the reality of a relationship gone bad. Don't believe for a moment these are examples of loving too much. Instead, they illustrate how emotional fusion increases domestic violence. Divorces create legal separation, and restraining orders attempt to ensure physical distance, yet many couples fight out their emotional fusion forever by proxy in court. Chilling movie Fatal Attraction portrays the tenacity of emotional fusion in an extramarital affair. Sometimes one partner feels, "You're not going to get away from me," while the other responds, "The enemy is coming over the walls of the fort." Sometimes both happens. When one partner responds out of emotional fusion, it usually triggers reciprocal reflexive responses from the other. So why is emotional fusion so tenacious? 2 words: borrowed functioning. So I often found that for a few months in my life, it would get dramatically better because I had someone in my life who was essentially propping me up. Like some family had quasi-adopted me, made me part of the family, or I'd made a new friend who kind of brought me along to all sorts of social events, introduced me into new circles, and vouched for me. So I was being propped up. I was, by this borrowed functioning, I got into a relationship and my life suddenly improved. But this was all just borrowed functioning. Differentiation refers to your core solid self, the level of development you can maintain independent of shifting circumstances in your relationship. However, you can appear more or less differentiated than you really are depending on your marriage's current state. Borrowed functioning artificially inflates or deflates your functioning. Like some people can function normally when they have their relationships going well, when they have other people propping them up. Your pseudo self can be pumped up through emotional fusion, which makes poorly differentiated people doggedly hang on to each other. 2 people in different relationships can appear to function at the same level, although they have achieved different levels of differentiation. The difference is that the better differentiated one will more consistently function well, even when the partner isn't being supportive or encouraging. So how do you function when your partner is not being supportive? How do you do on your live stream when the chat isn't being supportive, understanding, complimentary, propping you up, saying, "Oh, you go, Luke, that's so wise," right? Can Luke stand on his own 2 feet when the chat isn't propping him up? So when we need to be needed and we can't settle for being wanted, we perpetuate poor functioning in our partner to maintain borrowed functioning. Superficially, we may look like we're encouraging our partner's autonomous functioning, but in truth, we suppress it on a daily basis. Borrowed functioning differs from mutual support because it artificially suppresses the functioning of one partner while it enhances functioning in the other. It feels good as long as we're on the side that is inflated by the borrowed functioning. We all experience a difference between our level of functioning when we support ourselves versus when we are emotionally supported by someone else. The wider this difference is, the more elevated our functioning is. This elevated functioning is not a reflection of our real self, not without a partner serving as a booster rocket. So we tend to latch on to people with whom we feel that we function better. We usually call this finding someone who brings out the best in me. Do you use that phrase? Someone who brings out the best in me. I'm looking for someone who brings out the best in me. Or, Lisa, she really brought out the best in me. Or if you use that kind of language, you're really talking about borrowed functioning. You're really talking about your need for somebody else to come along and to prop you up because you don't really have the right stuff. Not sufficiently mature to stand on your own 2 feet, to have integrity if other people around you aren't being supportive?
There are a lot of us, when we're battling out the wars of self-development, sex suffers, and it should. If you're going to have sex, be personal. If you're going to have sex, be related to how you feel about yourself and how you feel about each other, then when you hit the wars of independence, which are built into emotionally committed relationships, yes, sex usually does suffer. But a lot of people think that that means that marriage kills sex. I think it's just a period that people go through that nobody anticipates. And you go through that, you come out the other side, you're usually a more solid, whole person who's more capable of loving on life's terms. And we often find that sex goes on to be the best of people's lives. The best tip that I think we could give somebody is to, you have to learn to hold on to yourself if you want the opportunity to hold on to your partner. That's what nobody expects. Everybody expects their partner to prop themselves up. And what a lot of people don't realize is, as human beings, we don't like having sex we constantly have to prop up. We like a partner who can stand on their own 2 feet as long as we can tell them when it's time to do that. So I think one of the primary tips to give people is to help them get a much more realistic view of the pattern of marriage, and that gives you hope when you're having a difficult time. We did some very interesting research now. We've had over 14,000 people take a survey that we've been doing, and it turns out that about 85% of people say that either their sex is dead, comatose and in danger of dying, or at the very least needing a wake-up call. And just knowing that that's what normal sex looks like, that there's not something wrong with you and that it's not a biological drive or you're going to have desire if you're in love, that's one thing that is real important that helps people. But then we've also developed different activities that people can do that also tend to rekindle passion. One of them is what we call heads on pillows, where both partners lie on their side. You can have your clothes on or off. Each person puts their head on a pillow and you both get your heads far enough apart that your partner doesn't look like a cyclops, and you just gaze. And there's a whole lot of people that they have the feeling of, I know why you'd want to have sex with me, but after all these years, why would you want to look at me? Why do you still love me? And I think that's one of the great mysteries of love, that most of us find that we don't believe that we would be truly loved if we were truly known. And that's one of the miracles of love, to be able to lie in bed, looking in each other, being in each other's arms, and to stop all the rubbing and all the different things that people do and just take the time to be together. For a whole lot of people, that's enough to bring tears to their eyes when they realize that this is really, really personal. Well, I think the lingerie manufacturers and the candy producers, they love the idea of Valentine's Day. And I think probably we could all use a little wake-up call once in a while, not to take our partner for granted. But for a whole lot of couples, it really focuses their attention on what they don't have. They know that they can buy all the candy, they can buy Fredericks of Hollywood, and it doesn't instill passion. In some ways, it instills anger. For a lot of people, you give them a negligee and the reaction is, why, you don't like my body? Or you think, I'm going to do something I wouldn't do because you bought me a box of candy. And there's tremendous pressure to, that's supposed to be the night, everybody's supposed to have sex. And some people have sex. I think a lot of people have big fights because it basically makes people realize what they don't have. Not that it has to be that way. A lot of people have the feeling of once desire or passion or love dies, it's dead. You can't rekindle that. And that's the exact opposite of what we found. All around the world, we found that people are really hungry for something that can make sex personal, that can make love not go back to the beginning of the relationship, but to have love and passion on an entirely new basis, on the basis of you know each other. And you've gone through difficult times. You've had children, which is hard, or you've had deaths in the family, or now people in the economic recession. These are really tough times, and this either blows people apart or it brings them together. And going through those kinds of experiences, I think, make people strong enough to love on life's terms, and that's tough. If you take a look at the earliest cuneiform tablets, you will find that people were looking for aphrodisiacs way back when. Nobody's really found one. All the drug companies now want to be the first, and they're using the miracles of modern science to try to come up with something. I think if you like chocolate and you eat chocolate, you're probably going to, be happier when you're having sex. But no, there's no way to overpower the human brain. And
Okay, guys, thanks for tuning in. That's it for tonight. Bye-bye.